Welcome to another episode of the Life of Elvis podcast. I'm your host Elvis, and today with me is Allison Finley from Oklahoma. She's a former nurse, energy healer, and life coach. So, on this podcast, we're gonna dive into a topic that's quite makes people a lot quite uncomfortable, especially here in the West. But we definitely need to have this conversation. So, it's gonna be about death, dying, and lots of other interesting things. And appropriately, I put on my Death t-shirt, which is one of my favorite bands. So let's get into it. Yeah, welcome on the podcast. We're glad to have you on.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and excited for where we flow in this conversation.
Yeah, me too. So let's start just from the beginning. Introduce yourself a little bit to my listeners and share your story and your background.
Absolutely. So my name's Allison, and I do a little bit of everything, but I'm definitely in this spiritual world. I do energy healing, I do spiritual coaching, as well as help people develop their spiritual gifts and learn how to use energy work on themselves to transform their lives. My background is in traditional nursing and hospice nursing, which is end of life care. So I really love all of the things, the science, the spirituality, all of kind of the things merged together to see how we can create our reality and how we can experience spirituality in a really practical way. So that's kind of my goal and what I do working with clients is helping them change their life with these spiritual tools as well as mindset and traditional, more traditional coaching as well, but really merging that with some of these spiritual aspects. Um, and yeah, I guess my background, again, I was born and raised in religion, so I was raised around spirituality, but it was definitely more in a box. There was a lot of limitations and a lot of rules of this is okay to play with spiritually and this is not, and this is who you have to be and this is who you can't be. And so that growing up in that really did a lot of programming, and put a lot of limitations on me and my spirituality and even really like my just path in life. And I kind of reached this breaking point in 8 years ago, actually, and became basically suicidal as I was just so lost and hopeless and living by so much programming. And I really, at that point, had kind of a spiritual awakening life in this misaligned way. And if that's the case, then I'm just gonna, leave because I'm not scared to die. I've never been scared to die. Or am I going to stay here and really live my life and live it from an aligned, authentic place and really face all my fears and go all the way in to this spiritual world? And that's obviously the choice that I made. And so the past 8 years, I've really just been on a journey of personal development, developing my own gifts, healing myself, helping others heal. And that has kind of led me on this very non-linear path to just being open to anything and everything that could help me. And so I just have so many tools and so many fun things that I love to work with that have helped me along the way, from this kind of spiritual and personal development world. So that's where I'm at today.
You mentioned you worked in a hospice, so I guess you had the kind of experience that most people are just cut off from, which is being there with people during the process of dying, right? Because, like I said in the intro, even thinking about our mortality is very, very uncomfortable for us, and we just always shove it to the side and try not to look that way over here in the West, even though each one of us is going to die at some point. It's totally inevitable. It's part of life. You can look at nature. It's a constant cycle: life, death, and so, what have you learned from being with people whilst they were dying?
Yeah. So it's such an interesting like setting to be in. And like you said, it's so interesting to see the contrast of, I would say the majority of people are very fearful of dying. But there are then those kind of select few that died with so much dignity and so much pureness and so much grace that inspired me so much. Like when I look back and think about some of my patients, like my most favorite experiences were experiences with the people who really welcomed death with open arms as a friend and as a gift and did not resist the inevitable. You know, the worst experiences for me and for patients and families were the ones who were terrified, right? And those just went on and they would suffer and they would hold on and it would just be a mess, you know, and there was so much fear and so much drama and so much of that. So it's so interesting that we can all as humans face similar situations, but based on our beliefs and based on like our consciousness and based on our energy, like we can handle situations so differently, right? So that's something I really learned is that, like you said, like just like nature, everything is a constant cycle. Death is as much a part of our human experience as being born is. And I think it's so interesting because in our culture, when a child is born, there's so much celebration. There's so much like, you know, baby showers and people get gifts and, you know, they do this big reveal on social media and it's this big thing and all the family celebrates and, you know, it's just like this huge celebration. And then on the other end of that, it's almost like we hide people away. We don't want to talk about it. Like, there's definitely no gifts involved. There's definitely no, like, you know, super big celebration on Instagram. But I just find that fascinating because in my actual experience, being in a birth and a child coming into the world is so sacred. But being with someone in their final moments and their final days and weeks on earth is, in my opinion, just as sacred, right? And there's so much to be celebrated and learned in that setting as well. And so I don't know, I learned so many things from people. It's always interesting to ask people what their their best moments were. And I will say when people talk about their life, they often shared more about small moments and very ordinary moments, such as like being with their spouse, like waking up next to their spouse in the morning or going on walks with their dog or taking their kids to school or having dinner or cooking, you know, dinner for their family. Those moments were really the ones that they shared about being the most meaningful rather than like this big thing that I achieved and this big goal that I accomplished, you know, or what people thought of me. Like their most meaningful things were super ordinary and simple. And I took that lesson and have really tried to apply that in my life and be like, okay, life is right now. Life is not like when I achieve this goal or when I make this amount of money. Like life is right now. And there's so much beauty in this moment, you know? And so I think that's probably my biggest lesson from hospice is just being present and living now and enjoying life where you're at.
It's really interesting. But when you think about it, what our lives consist of, it's mainly these small moments,
Yeah.
isn't it? I mean, yeah, we can have some big achievements, but that's kind of like a one-off thing. But most of it is really just the small moments we most of the time don't even remember properly. You know, all the small moments when you were kids and just playing around, you know, going out or something like that. It's
Yeah.
really
And it's
interesting.
all those moments like stacked on each other that
Yeah.
create our life experience. Like I think a lot of times we're like people are waiting to live their life and it's like your life is right now. Like it's happening now. There's nothing to wait on. And that's in the mind, right? Like that's a mental story and projection that something or something outside of us in the future, in a future now moment, is going to save us from what we're experiencing now, or is going to be better than what we're experiencing now. And not that that's not true, because it's like there are goals and there are wonderful things in the future. But if we constantly push our happiness and our pleasure and our joy to the future, it will elude us, you know?
Yeah, suddenly you go find yourself being 60 and you never lived properly.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
With your experience with dying people, now we're going to address the big elephant in the room, right? Because there's always been throughout history some kind of notion that there's some kind of survival of consciousness after uh, the death of the body. Now, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah. So working in this setting, actually working in the hospital, and I did hospice in the hospital setting as well, and I worked in the ICU, and a lot of people die in the ICU. And a lot of people die alone in the ICU. I don't think people realize that. So, when I was working in the hospital, around that was the first time I was around death. Like I've never had a family member close to me pass away, like ever. And so it was the first time I was really around death so frequently. And there were a couple specific times that patients died where I had these kind of supernatural experiences. That's what really started to open me up to mediumship and understanding kind of the afterlife from a actual, not from a book and not from what other people told me, but from actual experience. And so when I was in the hospital, and I think we had talked about this previously, but like my gifts started coming back online. Like I started to see things and feel things and hear things that really scared me at first, until I really learned how to work with them. But from my experience, when patients die or when people die, their soul obviously leaves the body, which is a body cannot physically live without a soul, right? Like the body is almost like a vehicle, a car, and the soul is almost like the driver. Like a car, I mean, I guess now with technology, cars can drive themselves, but in theory, like a car can't
Yeah.
drive itself, right? Like it needs a consciousness to drive it. And that's kind of the same with the body. Like a body that is not alive because the soul is not inhabiting it and it's no longer functioning. So, from my experience, when a patient actually dies, their soul will leave the body and typically stay in the room. Especially if there's family involved, the soul will hang out with the family and actually attempt to kind of comfort and love on the family. I'm very visual, but also very feeling and sensing as well. So I've literally seen like a spirit leave the body and kind of surround a family, like almost like, not like a ghost. It's the way I see it is it's kind of more of an energy ball, and it can kind of separate off. So if there was 5 people in a room, it can kind of separate and kind of engulf and create almost like a fog, like a spiritual like fog around an entire group of people. And there's this kind of uplifting and comforting energy that most souls exude once they leave the body. There's this big release of like the personality and the ego mind, and they kind of step into that presence of like that oneness that spirits are. And that's been my experience and from from this experience, I would say that souls usually hang out with their family for several weeks. Like a lot of times souls will not leave, sometimes for a year or 2 years. They may stay with a spouse, they may stay in a home. And that's really up to the soul. It's not, they're not forced to stay, they're not forced to leave. In the spirit world, time is not really a thing like it is for us, right? So 2 years in the spirit realm is not like 2 years on earth. It's very different. And so souls will stay around to support their family in that grief period, and that can look longer or shorter for some people. I've also had it, like I had when I worked in the ICU in the hospital. I mean, I had a lot of drug overdoses, and a lot of homeless people that would come in, and they would mostly die alone. And so in that instance, when their soul left their body, they may go to specific people, like they may visit a family member that's still alive and say goodbye or express gratitude. But sometimes they would literally just leave, like they would go back to beyond the veil in the spirit realm, you know. And a lot of times angels or spirit guides are in the room as someone is crossing over. So when someone in hospice, there's a time where they start to, like, where the body starts to be non-responsive, right? Like there's a time where you're not dead, but it could be 24, 48, 72 hours where you're not dead, but you're not responding, right? And the soul actually leaves, comes in and out of the body in that time period. And they start to practice leaving the body, and they'll start to maybe interact with, you know, spirit guides or ancestors. I mean, if you've known anybody who's been passing away, the last several weeks of their life, they will start to hallucinate and see spirits and see ancestors or have dreams. That is very common. And so a lot of times ancestors or family members that have passed on or angels or guides will come to help assist their soul in detaching from the body and help them cross over. So a lot of times, like when a soul leaves the body, you know, all the family will be standing in the room, and there might also be 5 or 6 angels in there. There might be ancestors in there. There might be spirit animals. Like I did a one of my favorite experiences in hospice was a Native American chief who passed away. And when he passed away, he was from a very specific tribe that was a tribe of wolves, the animal wolves. It was like their representation, that was their spirit animal. And so when he passed away, like there were wolf spirits that like came in to help assist. So it gets really it gets really kind of woo woo spiritual, right? There's not necessarily like hard and fast rules. Basically based on the soul and based on their life and their experience and their connections in the spirit world will kind of help shape their experience of crossing over, whether they stay longer or shorter, who's there, who's not. So it varies widely. So that's my belief on that. That's a lot of information.
There's a lot of information that a lot of our listeners, I'm pretty sure there's got some of them gonna be like, oh, this is just absolute nonsense. It's woo-woo and all that stuff. But please hang on, because I want to go a bit deeper into this. And yeah, there's a lot of resistance to these kinds of experiences and ideas. But as far as we know, we are probably the first civilization on Earth, human civilization, to have these kinds of opinions, to be so grounded in the materialistic reductionist view of the world, where everything that's, you know, related to consciousness or stuff like that, we just, doesn't exist. And you know, throughout the millennia, this was the norm. You know, people lived with this kinds of stuff. They believe in it. People still do. Like I just recently heard the majority of Americans still believe it as something supernatural. You know, that there's more to life. And you mentioned your background, that you came from a Christian family. In my case, it's because in former Czechoslovakia, we had like 40 years of communism. So the previous two generations of my family were basically atheists. So I was never really pushed into a certain direction when it comes to religion. It was, even though my parents were atheists, they were still fairly open to certain things. They did mock a little bit this notion there's like a man in the sky, like a puppeteer or something like that, which is a fairly infantile way of looking at things. And to be fair, even most people who believe in major religions, they don't see it that way. Many times it's just an argument of a really hardcore atheists trying to just, say that it's all absolute nonsense, all this stuff. So in my case, yeah, also didn't subscribe in this kind of idea, but over the years, I had some experience of my own. I started doing my research into Buddhism, Taoism, and I've never been very, very drawn to Western major religions, especially not the kind of ones where they tell you that you just have to believe in it,
Yeah,
right?
I don't
It's
like
all,
that.
no evidence or anything, just
Yeah.
believe in it. That's what I like about Buddhism, for example. Like they don't tell you to like you have to believe in this. It's more like come and see.
Yeah.
Up to you. They don't even like when it comes to like the teachings of Jesus. Like there's nothing wrong with it. Most of them I agree with, right? But what I don't necessarily agree is the way they made him into a god. Like he's something special. Like in Zen Buddhism and Buddhism in general, they really try to avoid these kinds of things. And even Buddha himself, Buddha Gautama, I'm talking about, because he wasn't the only Buddha out there. Anyone can be a Buddha, actually. So even he was saying, like, I'm not special. What I achieved, anyone can. Everyone has this, let's call it a divine spark in them, which enables them to achieve this kind of states. So, like I said, I did research into this. Then I had some of my own experiences, which, if I were to look at science, what's the norm these days, the materialistic worldview, according to that, it's all either coincidence, hallucinations, or stuff people made up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just not good enough explanation for this stuff. Definitely wasn't for me. So even though I come from atheist background, I definitely do not consider myself an atheist, despite not believing in any major religion. But I do think that there's much more to reality than we think it is. And yeah, even the fact that so many people believe and they actually have these kinds of experiences, like you said you have. I had some things that, like I said, science cannot really explain properly.
What have your
So,
experiences been? I want to hear one of yours.
well, a lot of it involves dreams, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that really got me thinking, and I was already researching a lot of stuff, so I knew things, but it's different to read about certain things than to actually experience them.
Yep.
So one of the experiences that really got me thinking about the nature of reality and whether it is really as solid as we think it is, well, lucid dreams.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, whenever you say something, I like to explain what it is for people who have never heard of it or something. It's probably the first time we're speaking about it on the podcast over here. So a lucid dream is when you are sleeping, you are dreaming, you're in the rapid eye movement part of the sleep cycle, and within that dream, you suddenly realize that you are dreaming, and suddenly you have a certain you can kind of control certain aspects of it. You can just look around like, what the hell? It's actual. I'm dreaming. I'm asleep, but I'm because normally you just go along with the dream. You don't know how you got there, and you just do certain things, even though some of them are absolutely ridiculous things you can experience over there, but you just go along with it. But now you're like, oh man, it's kind of like same awareness and consciousness you have in normal day, just within a dream. Now, it happened quite spontaneously for me because I read about it. It can happen sometimes when you read about lucid dreams, and that kind of triggers it.
Yeah.
There's yeah, there's also techniques you can do, fairly
I was gonna
simple
say, you
ones.
can learn how to do this
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Everyone has the ability to learn to lucid dream. And it's very interesting. But I've never been, for some reason, consistent with them.
Mhm.
But yeah, I read this amazing book from actually a Tibetan Lama who emigrated to the West, and it was the Tibetan Yoga of Sleep and Dream. Very good book. Can't remember the name of the author. So I read that, and shortly after that, I had my first lucid dream when I was at my grandma's place, where I used to spend a lot of time when I was a kid, or in my early 20s. And I was in the living room, and suddenly I just look around like, hold on, I'm dreaming, you know. So I look at the clock. I kind of walked through the middle of the living room, despite there should be a table. There were, instead of two pieces of the window, there were three of them. But otherwise, everything was like, just like in reality. And after that, I had a few more of them, you know, every once in a few months or so. Especially when the sleep is not so deep, quite shallow, either early in the morning or when I just napped in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And I had a few of them where I just looked around, either at this person's face or just looked at the ground in somewhere in the forest. And when I looked at the ground, you could see dead leaves, small stones. There's so much detail, because when you wake up from a dream, it's kind of like a fading memory, right?
Mhm.
Like a very rapidly fading memory, like something that happened maybe months or years ago. But when you are actually within the dream and you realize that you're dreaming, it's it's literally just as real as all this, what we are experiencing right now. So that got me thinking, like, is this reality really so firm, solid, and real as we think it is? Well, even the neuroscience now tells us that uh, the notion that we have about perception is that our eyes and our brain just to look out into reality, into the world we are now in, and it's like, you know it, we just perceive our reflection of what's out there as it is, right? But we know that's not true. First of all, there's a lot of information coming into our brain which the brain just filters out.
Mhm.
We are aware of just a very small portion of it. And then our brain does so much post processing. It's crazy. So we literally construct the reality that we see, and we don't not perceive the vast majority of it. So saying that, yeah, we see reality as it is, it's not true. We actually have no idea what and how reality actually looks like.
Yeah.
So these kinds of experiences were pretty interesting. But then I had also other experiences, also dreams where I predicted the future. For example, I remember meeting a person in a dream, and it was kind of crowded. It was at school actually, and I haven't seen this person for months, maybe even a year or so at that point. And we were a few meters apart. She looked at me, and it wasn't that nice. And just a few days or maybe a week or two later, I met that person in town. It wasn't a school, but it was a crowded
Mhm.
place in a shopping center. And her expression and everything just the same as in a dream.
Uh-huh.
And like, how do you explain that?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then probably the most interesting one that I had. And this is gonna be the last one, so you get to speak as well.
It's good. I love it. I love these stories. I'm like all about it.
Yeah. Also, I like to ask people like, have you experienced something like that?
Yeah.
It's interesting to talk about this stuff. Now, I've been always interested in these kind of things like since I was a kid. That's why I'm so excited about this podcast.
No, I love talking about it.
Yeah. So this was last year. Yeah, probably in summer or so. So I had this dream. I think it started with me being somewhere on Neptune, and suddenly I just went through. I don't know. I guess it looked like a wormhole or black hole depiction in movies, which is, it's not correct. Most movies, like going through a tunnel, which was kind of dark and bluish and kind of foggy, and I ended up in a abandoned house. Right, so it was. I guess it looked more American, to be honest. Like a bit larger than the European houses, and you could tell that there was no one around, nowhere near. Must have been left alone for years because there was lots of dust and pieces of wood and that kind of stuff. And so I was looking around. At first, I felt a little bit afraid, but then I was like, "Nah, it's fine." And somehow I knew that this was the subconscious of, let's just say, someone close to me, right? And then I walked a little bit, and from out of nowhere, this person came up to me and she hugged me,
Mm.
right? So very strange dream. I think at the very end I was even outside of the house, but then I think it changed or something. But anyway, after I woke up, I sent a message into a group where this person was in, also someone else, and told what happened in the dream. And then she responded like, that's interesting because I just had a dream where I felt abandoned, and she said, and she never told, at least I can't remember that she would tell me this, that my biggest fear is has always been the fear of abandonment.
Mhm.
So again, how do you explain this?
Yeah.
This can't be a coincidence.
Mhm.
So yeah, these kinds of experiences that I had, that got me to really rethink this this materialistic and reductionist worldview that we have, and yeah, a lot of my thoughts end up in the book that I published.
I mean, I definitely think I'm comforted by the thought that this reality is not super solid. Like, I'm comforted by the idea that there are other dimensions and other versions of reality, and that reality is a lot more fluid than we've been taught. I feel like, too, just the concept of like our spirits and death being something that's not scary because of the idea of other dimensions and realities. I think it is really scary to think that when you die, then everything is done and everything is over. Like, I understand why people are scared of death because that is a scary thought, right?
Yeah,
But I also think that our souls are not in agreement with that thought. Like, I think that's a very, like, again, that's very much mental. But when you feel into that thought, I feel like there's something in everyone or most people that's kind of like, there's got to be more, you know? So I'm comforted by that. I love hearing about like supernatural experiences. And I think science has come such a long way with helping us to be able to kind of prove and validate a lot of things that have been in spirituality for, for long periods of time. But I also think that there are things like what you said that just can't, science is not there yet. And maybe one day it will be, which would be lovely if it is. But hearing and having your own personal experiences to draw from, I think is so, like, that's what really builds that belief, is when you can like you can read about lucid dreaming, but until you have that experience, it's kind of like it's just not the same, right? So I think even welcoming in those and setting the intention of like, I want to experience these types of things. I want to experience spirituality in a more real, practical way, or I want to have some of these supernatural experiences. I think just setting that intention and throwing that out into the universe, like, opens up your energy field to receive more of those things. So for your listeners, if they're like, I haven't had any supernatural experiences, I would say opening up and like inviting those in, and you can set intentions of like inviting like positive experiences in, because obviously there's both sides, that light and dark of the spiritual world. And so setting that intention. So that's like an invitation to your listeners to play with that idea of inviting in some different experiences and just see what happens, right?
Yeah. Now, when it comes to science, that's a big problem there, because like if you take the current state of things, like their explanation, which paints a picture of a universe that just doesn't give a fuck about us. That's just cold, unconscious. It goes from nowhere to nowhere, no meaning, no purpose. It's not a good view. It's nothing. It's not very positive. You can't draw any. If anything, if you really get into it too much, you're gonna become a nihilist. Like there's no meaning to life, no meaning to be, no purpose to it, no point in being good to people or anything. And now the question is, how do you reconcile these two sides? Because it's very interesting, because a lot of science, our technology, and things we know, and even the scientific method itself does come from the supernatural. It's for people, most people don't realize. I think it was René Descartes who started the scientific method, and he got it from an angel, if I remember right. This information.
Yeah, it was like channeled information.
Yeah, exactly. It's one thing. Then even more recently, Niels Bohr, when he came up with the model of the atom, he saw it in a dream when he was sat on a planet and he saw the planets revolve around him. So that's why he got the idea for the model of the atom. Then there was even recently with the PCR tests. Most people don't know that the inventor, Kerry Mullis, he got a Nobel Prize for it. And what helped him invent this thing was an altered state of consciousness after taking LSD. Now, so again, how do you reconcile these two things? Because in the materialistic worldview, which says it's all just matter and energy, and it's all explainable and measurable, there's no real space for, like we are talking about, souls and some out of body experiences, near death experiences, the things that I had, precognition. There's literally no space for it. Right. So what's your opinion on that? How do you reconcile these two?
I feel like they, first of all, there's something in a modality called reality transurfing. And the basis of that modality is that it's kind of a manifestation or reality creation modality. And they say that there is evidence to support all theories. And because of the way that our brain works with, like you said earlier, taking in information and filtering it out, like our brain has a bias. It wants us to be right? Like we always want to be right. And that's why there's billions of people on the planet and everybody thinks that they are right because everybody's brain is finding evidence to support that their theory, whatever they believe, they are right in believing that. And so I actually think that if you really believe like that there's evidence to support all theories, and you understand like, oh, okay, atheists believe there is evidence to support atheism, right? Like otherwise people wouldn't believe that. Like their brains are providing them with support of that belief. Whereas
it's in the case of atheists, that's problem. It's more like a lack of evidence, which they take as evidence of
Right? They take
lost
the lack of
non-existence.
evidence as evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in this idea of like, there's evidence to support all theories, I think that you can reconcile it by then deciding that like either of those things could be true. And then you ask yourself, is that belief like, does that belief feel good to me? And does that belief serve me on whatever level? So, for example, like if you want to believe that there is no meaning to life and everything is just matter and it's kind of meaningless and pointless, like, does that belief make you feel good? Does that belief serve you? Does that belief, like, how do you then show up in your life from that belief point, right? Versus if I believe that there is meaning and there is a higher order and there is a higher power that is kind of orchestrating in the chaos, then how does that belief serve me? Because I really believe that we get to, as a consciousness, we get to just pick what we want to believe, and then the world will mirror that back to us with evidence. So I kind of think like if people want to believe that the world is meaningless and there's no purpose, and they choose that, they can go then like, okay, how's my experience of life going to be from that place, from that belief? And if they want to kind of play in that, their reality might mirror back to them that belief has holes in it or is not fully aligned for them in their soul. And then that might push them on another path. Like I think our beliefs can shift and change throughout our life. And so I kind of don't think that it's a bad thing if someone wants to camp out in that belief of like nothing matters, right? But asking yourself, like, do I want to believe that? Does that feel good to me? How do I show up in my life from that place? And I go by like the feeling. Like if something feels really good, I want to go towards that, right? So this idea that nothing matters, like that doesn't feel good to me, and I could choose that belief, but that's like not how I want to show up in my life from that place. So, I don't know, I think that puts the power back in our hands to choose what we want to believe, and that there really is evidence to support all theories of whatever you want to believe.
Yeah, I get your point. So I guess I'll rephrase the question a little bit. These experiences that you had or I had, how can they possibly exist in a materialistic world? Because again, science says that spirits floating around or some spiritual dimensions. There's no evidence for it, and they can't be. But it seems like that these phenomena, they are actually real, and there's some actual scientific evidence for near-death experiences or reincarnation. These kinds of stuff which we probably going to get into in this podcast. But like I said, how is it possible that these kind of almost ethereal experiences and phenomena can exist within the material universe?
Mm-hmm. Honestly, for me personally, I have just decided that I won't know the answer to certain things. Like, I've decided that the human brain has limitations, right? Like, my human brain has limits. Like, when we think about the concept of that time doesn't exist, our brain can't actually hold that, like, it can't fully digest that thought. And so for me, I kind of am at peace with this idea that certain things are a mystery. And to me, that's okay. I know that some people can't accept that, but I feel like I have compassion and I honor the power of the human brain, but I also honor its limits. And so when I hit up against something that I can't hold, like the idea that time doesn't exist or that there was never a beginning of time, right? When I hit up against those concepts, I just have to like, it's okay, brain. We're going to be okay. We don't know the answer and we're never going to. So how can I cope by just releasing the need to know and just accepting that there are things, that there are limits to my brain and what it can hold. So that's how I personally reconcile it. And then I like mystery. I think it's really beautiful to both seek answers and to then also be at peace with not receiving. Like, I think it's okay to ask a question and not receive an answer, right? Like, I know, again, not everybody can hold that. But for me personally, I like the mystery, and I like the idea that there's a higher kind of ebb and flow to the universe that is beyond what the human mind can comprehend at this point.
You had a really good point, which I also like to bring up, that the human mind has its limits.
Mm-hmm.
There's only so much it can actually comprehend. Like you said, the non-existence of time, which for which there is evidence in physics that that's the case. More the interesting facts are that, like, let's say you are smashing some particles in the Large Hadron Collider, and if you want to express it mathematically, what happens there when you smash two particles? If you express it within space-time, you're gonna get like 18 or 80 pages of equations. It's super complicated, right? But if you try to express it outside of space-time, it's like a very short equation.
Simple.
Yeah. And again, like trying to imagine how the non-existence of time, you can't really do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's same goes for the concept of eternity or infinity. Like, people tend to think that it's like time going on and on and on, it never ends, right? But that's probably not the case. It's probably the absence of time. Like, imagine if you were a photon traveling at the speed of light, according to the theory of relativity. If you reach the speed of light, like actually get to it, not like 99.999% of speed of light, but 100% of speed of light, time stops.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were a photon and you were conscious, then you would traverse the entire universe in zero time. Like, no time will elapse. You will experience no time, and there's limitations to our mind and to our brain, like you said, and what you can imagine. Like, for example, imagining like something like this, like what I just said, experiencing no time, there's no survival value into it. Just like we can't imagine a million people. Now, you can imagine 20 or 7 people. It's easy to imagine, but million, there's no value for our survival in that.
Mm-hmm.
Same goes for imagining eternity. So there's the limits to it. But on the other side, we can experience these things. I also had experiences where my consciousness expanded like so much, and there was no time. The past, present, future all fused into one, and so yeah, it's hard to explain this, especially using language, which is very limited.
Yes,
If
language.
yeah, if I say the word tree, you're gonna think of a different tree that I do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, and different words have different meanings to people, and so on and so forth. And like I say, it's very limited, but we have the capacity of to experience these things, even just your own experiences, what you saw in a hospice or outside of it. You can't just shove it under the rug and say, yeah, it's just nonsense, you're making this up, or especially when it's such a big part of the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
Way more people have these experiences than we think.
Yeah. Yeah, so interesting. And I think people too, like, what helps me is separating the mind from our actual consciousness, right? And if we think about the mind, it is an organ in our body, just like our liver, just like our kidneys, just like our heart. But we don't think of the mind as an organ, right? We think of the mind as who we are so often. And so I really like, when I approach the mind or when I'm working with the mind, I really do try and honor it like I would honor my other organs. Like I would never ask my kidneys to do something that's beyond their functioning. Like I wouldn't ask my kidneys to digest my food, right? Because it's not set up for that. That's not how it's set
Yeah.
up. So I try not to, like, I try to honor my mind's limitations as like, I'm not going to ask you or force you to do something that's beyond what you've been designed to do, right? And I've just settled that. And that's my consciousness being able to even ask that question or being able to even hold space for that. That's the difference between my consciousness and the essence and that spiritual side of then observing the mind and the mental processing. And it's weird, it's tricky, right? And the mind doesn't like that, and it doesn't want to hold space for that. But that's how I do it.
You brought up a good point as well. Again, this, because if someone says the word consciousness, again, people think this word has different meanings to different people. But when we're speaking about consciousness or the soul, which I think is more the same thing, it's not the mind, it's not your thoughts. We identify with them, even though they're, even we think our personality is something solid. We know who we are, but that changes all the time.
It's fluid.
So let's make the distinction there between consciousness and the mind. Why? When I say consciousness, and that's why it comes back to more my own experiences, where the quality they experience, they see or feel, hear, touch, all that can change so much. You can have all sorts of different states of consciousness, but there's one thing that always stays the same. That's kind of like a constant there. There's something within you which experiences these things. It's like an observer, right?
You observe, yeah.
It doesn't do anything, right? It doesn't control things, but it's, let's say going into a cinema, right? You need to have the blank, how do you call it?
The screen.
Yeah, the screen, right? Without that, you're not gonna see the movie, right? So how is it possible that something can experience things like this? And again, like speaking of survival of consciousness after death, because again, the scientific method says that, and this most people don't realize that this is literally just an assumption, that the brain, the consciousness is a byproduct of brain activity, right? And then when you die, it just, it's off, right? But your experiences and experience of other people, some of them well documented, say that there is some kind of survival of consciousness after death.
And it's such like again, the mind doesn't like that. And I think the mind doesn't like when it doesn't have solid answers for certain things. And that's just what comes back to what we were talking about, just honoring the limits of the mind and going, okay, like we might not have the answers and science might not be advanced enough to prove or be able to validate certain things, but then you just have to decide if you'll let yourself validate that, right? And that was a big thing that I came into when, I shifted my beliefs around, and when I came out with my gifts, like I was really concerned and worried about what other people thought, or me, worried about people thinking I'm crazy or judging me and all of that. And that then kind of led me into having to then look at that side. Why do I feel that I need to be validated by other people? Why do I feel like I need to be, accepted by people that aren't going to accept me? Can I be okay with people thinking things about me, whether they're true or not? You know what I mean? Can I let all of that go? So I think that's when that like kind of personal development, like self-mastery comes in, of like, can I hold not knowing the answer? Can I hold people thinking of me a certain way? Can I let that go? And how can I manage my thoughts around that and cope with that? And so I think that's a really normal thing too. When people start to explore this world, they feel like, oh, I'm going crazy, or what are people going to think, or this and that. And I think it's just like honoring what you're drawn to and honoring what you feel your soul is leading you to, or what you feel drawn to or pulled to. And obviously, anyone listening to your podcast is probably on that journey already, and that evolves over time as well, what you're open to and ready for, which is just makes the journey fun, right? Because it never gets old and there's always new things to learn and experience.
That's true. That's why I wanted to ask you actually. And you just went straight into it about your gifts. Like, what kind of gifts you have, and when did you find them, and that's that kind of stuff. Because you can hear the stories of people who have similar experiences like you, And again, we can't just put them aside like, it's just nonsense. So you speaking out about these kinds of experiences that can hopefully help people who not gonna think they're super crazy. Because again, um, me to realize that just because science doesn't mm, understand certain things or things, that it's just absolute nonsense, it doesn't mean these things don't exist, right? And that's, as the saying goes, science advances one funeral at a time, right?
Exactly.
So tell me more about your gifts, basically.
Yeah. So if you study like spiritual gifts, you'll look, there's a lot of different terminology for it, like clairvoyance, clairaudience, but essentially what that's talking about is your spiritual senses. And I have found with being in the spiritual world and playing in spiritual stuff is that there's always a natural supernatural correlation. So, like, a lot of times our body, if it reflects an issue, it's reflecting an energy. So people who are having issues with their sight, a lot of times that's an energy pointing to what are you not wanting to look at in your life. Like the body reflects different things. And sometimes it's really literal and sometimes not. But the way that spiritual gifts work is similar to our physical senses, in the sense of people can be more visual with their third eye, right? Like some people are just, they see visions, they see auras, they see colors, they see different things. Sometimes people like you, they have this kind of precognition of where they get downloads of things from a future timeline. And that's a gift in itself, of being able to tap into future timelines or perceive possible things from the future. There's also just people who feel like intuitively, like they can just sense energy, more of like you would sense the temperature outside. Like you can feel if, it's 60 degrees versus, 90 degrees. Like you can feel if it's hot or cold based on how you're physically feeling. And some people are sensitive to energy in that way. They can just feel like they walk into a room and they're like, somebody's been arguing in here, or this energy is heavy versus this energy feels good. There's some people who are very auditory. Like they might be able to hear people's thoughts. They might be able to hear spirits. They might be able to hear phrases. That's a gift within itself as well. So there's lots of different spiritual gifts. I mean, healing is a spiritual gift. I find that a lot of people who work in any type of physical healing setting often have an energetic healing aspect to them as well, that they're not even necessarily aware of, but their aura gives out an uplifting, healing, aligning energy. So you'll see that a lot with, medical people or things like that. They kind of have that natural energy. So I think my stance on gifts is that everybody has them. They might be stronger or weaker depending on how they were raised, their belief system, what their soul intended to come in to this, lifetime with. For me personally, when I was young, I just remember having a lot of different experiences. I remember being very sensitive to energy just at a young age. Like there was just certain people I didn't like certain ones of my parents' friends. Like I would just be like, I don't like being around this person. And I didn't have language at the time, but what I was saying is I don't like their energy field.
What age are we talking about,
I
roughly?
would say like 3 or 4. I remember, and you see this with babies, right? Like you'll see babies not want to go to certain people, and that's because they don't like their energy. Because before we have language and before we can communicate, just like animals, we really are feeling and sensing energy, and we're exchanging information through the energetic space and our subconscious and all of that.
Intuition.
Yes, and intuition. And so my understanding too of kind of the spiritual gifts, and even like when we're being programmed as children in the afterlife as well, like right before patients die or people die, there's something in the spirit world called the veil. And that's kind of what separates the spiritual realm from this physical realm and our perception of it. And so when a baby comes into the world, they cross over the veil. They go from kind of this spirit into a physical body in this physical form. But since they're still so close to the veil, because they've been on the spirit realm not that long ago, they're much more sensitive to all of their gifts, right? And they're sensitive to energy. And the older we get and the more conditioned we are then by society, as we start to kind of push those gifts down. But it's interesting because at the end of life, and you're getting closer to the veil, you're getting closer to crossover to death, you actually get more sensitive, just like babies are when they come in. And so I find that with patients, they would start to have these gifts turn on. Like again, 2-3 weeks before they die, they would start seeing energy or seeing spirits or hearing voices. And a lot of times it's scary because they don't know what's happening, and they think like there's the hallucination portion of that and all of that. But my understanding is really that they're starting to get closer to the veil, and the closer we are to the veil, the more sensitive we are to our gifts and to energy and intuition and spirits and the spirit realm. So that's kind of an interesting thing that I don't think people know, and I didn't know until I started working with that. And I've been in nursing school, we did a rotation in labor and delivery. So being in the room when a baby is born, like there's just an energy about that is like nothing else, which is really, really incredible. So for me personally, with my spiritual gifts, I, as a child, I've now since developed all of my gifts, which you can do. But again, we're usually naturally more inclined to one or two. So for you, you mentioned precognition, and actually dreaming is another one that, like you said, can be developed as a skill that everybody can learn. But some people are just naturally like dreamers, have more dreams and easier for them to lucid dream. So I think for me, my strongest gifts coming in were just this sensing of energy, this feeling, and then also the visual component of being able to see people's auras, or being able to see angels, darker energies, spirits. Like I was just kind of able to see that fairly naturally as a child, and then being very fearful and scared of that process, right? And being told that that's not a good thing, right? That that's weird and that's scary. And how do your parents hold that? Like if your child told you they saw stuff that you couldn't see, like how would you hold that? So when I look back, I closed down my gifts out of safety, right? And out of not understanding. And then they kind of started to come back online when I started working in the hospital. And I think the reason for that was my soul was ready, to open them back up. And then I think just the intensity of the environment. I just couldn't deny that anymore. Whereas before I could kind of keep myself somewhat isolated and very in controlled environments, like my home and my space, and not being around a lot of people. But then when I was in the hospital, it was like people who go to the hospital are not in a good place, and a lot of times are not people like you and me, right? Like they're not super aware. There's a lot going on. And when people have extreme physical issues, a lot of times that's a reflection of deep energetic and spiritual and emotional issues as well. And so I think just the intensity of that environment is when all of my gifts started coming back online, like seeing things, hearing, patients' thoughts. Like I would even be in the grocery store and I would just be standing in line and I'd hear like a word or like a, kind of see what that person was thinking about or hear their thoughts. It was very strange. So that was kind of how it started for me. And then I learned that people teach this and that you could go to different places to learn about this and to develop this in meditation. So I studied and worked under kind of like a mentor who was a psychic and very like developed in all of these gifts. And that's partly how I developed it. I've taken classes, I've done my own meditations. Like my angels and guides have given me downloads and shown me how to do certain healing techniques. And also just, again, practice being in the space where I was around spirits all the time in hospice. That's how I was able to kind of learn and develop and play with these gifts. Which again, I think some people come in with the intention to really have a more spiritual experience in life. And I think other people come in with an intention to play in other things, that are not necessarily super spiritual. So if people aren't interested in that or don't feel like they're drawn to that, I usually say then it's either not for you now or souls, maybe your soul didn't come in to have that experience.
Mm-hmm. I'd like you to, you mentioned angels, for example. So like, could you share one of the moments where you saw one of them and, just give some more details? And what do you think they actually are?
Yeah. So, as a child, I think I would have like spirits and angels would come into my room, especially at night. Again, like that nighttime kind of when things are calmer. We welcome in different thoughts. It's a different energy than it is of like right now when we're talking, right? Like when you're laying at night alone in bed at night, like you have intrusive thoughts, right? Like there's things, you hear noises, like you're at a different level of consciousness before you're going to sleep. So for me, I remember angels coming into my bedroom and how they visually appear to me. Angels specifically are more of a like white golden kind of essence aura. I do see them as somewhat physical in the sense of like human-ish looking. Angels to me appear much more feminine. They don't really appear super like gender defined. There's more of a feminine quality about angelic presences versus like galactic presences are very different. Elementals, fairies, they actually all have a very different feel energetically and almost like different cultures. Like, when you like, if you've ever traveled, like going to a different country or a different culture, people might look the same, but they feel their energy and their presence and their physical presentation is slightly different, right? And we see that like throughout the world, the different cultures. So I kind of see like the spirit world is similar. So angels kind of have their own energy, just like their own culture and their own visual appearance. And then kind of galactic presences would be more, have a totally different feel, right? And like different types of spirits have different feelings about them and different vibes about them. So the angelic realm specifically, they're very high vibrational. Like when you feel an angel come in, there's an uplifting energy about them. There's a powerful presence that's you can feel the power, and you can feel kind of an uplifting presence to them, is how I would describe it. And like I said, visually, they present very more of a white or golden kind of warmer hue. Of sometimes I see them more as an energy ball, and sometimes they take more of the form of a human type appearance. So yeah, I would see those energies come in as a kid and not be afraid, right? Versus a darker spirit coming in, um, you can feel and see those things as well. So growing up, my parents were missions pastors, actually. So I actually traveled all around the world doing humanitarian trips with them. And Africa specifically is very heavily influenced spiritually. And so going to Africa was when I experienced some of my most supernatural spiritual things. And I remember coming back from a trip when I was like 13 or 14 from Africa, and I was in my bedroom, and I couldn't see the spirit, but I could feel like a really dark, heavy, scary. Like I just had this fear come over me as if I was paralyzed, and I could not speak. I could not move. It was almost like the energy and the presence in the room was like very dark. And when that happened, there was something in my spirit that just kind of like cried out for help because I didn't know what to do. And in that moment, I felt and saw an actual like angelic, high vibrational presence come in and kind of escort the darkness out. And the room immediately shifted and felt lighter, and I could move again and I could speak again. So that would be like, again, some of the things that I experienced in childhood. And then now, I mean, hospice is a great example. If someone usually, if I go into someone's home, a patient, there's usually at least one angel there. Most people have a guardian angel around them, and most people have spirit guides with them. And so, I mean, I don't know that there's really ever been a time that I've gone into a patient's home or room and not felt or seen some type of spirit with them. Um, so again, spirits are a lot more common, I think, and angels and spirit guides a lot more common than I think people realize that are around assisting us and helping us. I was in a car accident in high school as well. And I remember like 3 angels coming in to surround the car as we like got in this major accident, and none of us were severely injured. So, I remember seeing just 3 energies come in and kind of surround. There was 3 of us in the car. And so those are examples. I'm trying to see. I mean, now I invite them in intentionally. There's something called archangels. So there's specific angels that have names, and then there's some that are just kind of more personal to each person, like a guardian angel. And so I work with specific ones now, and you can just kind of invite them in. Honestly, just like humans, you can invite in angels and presence and different spirits just by with your own consciousness welcoming them in or welcoming their assistance in. And they actually always do want to help us, but so often we don't ask. And one of the rules of kind of just like we have rules here of like gravity is like a law of this physical reality, right? If you jump off something, you're going to go to the ground because of gravity. It's the same in the spirit world of angels and certain spirits. They can't intervene if we don't welcome them in because of the law of free will. So I've learned something that's super valuable is to ask for help more and to open up and to ask for wisdom, ask for peace, ask for assistance, ask for help, ask for guidance, because so often it's available to us, but because of the law of free will, we don't let it in if we don't ask, which is interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting. Now the question is, these, let's say, angelic creatures, beings, do they have an existence of their own? Where do they come from? And or can it be something that's more existing, like a part of us, something that's in the in our unconscious? What do you think?
So I think, from my experience, just having different realities, the beings have their own realities. So, like for galactics, like they have their own planets, they have their own homes, if you will. And it's the same with angels. They have their own realm. We call it heaven, but it's just a heavenly realm. It's just another dimension of another reality that is a totally different vibration than what we're experiencing on Earth. And Earth is such an interesting planet of duality and of physicality that it attracts a lot of different types of beings, to interact with it. Like Earth is just a really special, interesting planet compared to other realms where, you know, that angelic realm is such high vibrational that darker, denser energies just can't be there, if that makes sense. So, from my personal experience of doing astral travel and that kind of thing, all of these types of different beings have their own realms that are their own vibration and their own energy and their own um, presence. Again, just like traveling, to different places, the culture is so different, the vibe is so different, it feels so different in another country. And that's really how all of these realms kind of are based on their vibration, from my personal experience.
Mm-hmm. Now this is again something a lot of people are gonna have trouble wrapping their heads around,
Mm-hmm.
because like you're saying that these different beings have their own realms, own realities, let's say, which they inhabit. Now someone's gonna think, because we tend to think in the terms that we know, you know. So like, where are they? How can they just come from that place to our place? And it comes down to, I think, what reality actually is.
Mm-hmm.
If you think, because in a way we are localized beings. We exist. I'm here right now. Not far from Stockholm. You're in Oklahoma. But like I said earlier, with the particle collider, how it's easier to express what's going on outside of space-time. I think way to reconcile these two things is that everything exists within consciousness, rather
Mm-hmm.
than the other way around. Consciousness existing within a material universe and just being like a byproduct or something. So that's a possibility which could explain things. Now, we need a good theory which can be falsifiable and actually tested somehow, to see if that is true. And there are some on the way. Like, for our listeners or for yourself, if you want to check it out. Donald Hoffman, he's doing some really good research. He came up with a interesting theory which basically says what I was saying, that it's consciousness that's fundamental, and out of that, space-time arises, right? And he basically says that the reality that we perceive, it's kind of like the interface on our laptops or phones or something like that. Like it presents itself in a way that we can interact with it. And it's only there so that consciousness, like my consciousness with your consciousness can actually interact in a sensible way. But let's say you have your phone, you got your folders, you got your apps and all that stuff, but you're not gonna think that the app or the folder, that's how it actually looks like in the within the device, right?
Mhm.
It's just an interface, so you can actually, if you were to manipulate all the voltages and the ones and zeros, you won't get anywhere, right? So again, he's trying to figure out a theory which would explain all this and which can be falsifiable. Then you get also, for example, the OR theory by Stuart Hameroff and Nobel Prize winner Roger Penrose. Yeah, that's also interesting, which kind of it might be able to explain how consciousness, which in this case can be something that can exist also outside the body, how it interacts with our brain and how it interacts with the material world, right? Stuart Hameroff, he did a lot of research on microtubules, which are um, exist within neurons and cells, and yeah, it's quite a lot of interesting research going on. So that might be an explanation for how to again how to reconcile these two things. Because if you think of the spirit realm, it's like an actual place, physical place like ours, um, that kind of doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, and the brain does not like that thought at
Yeah,
all.
yeah, yeah. It makes more sense that all this it comes even down to what previous civilizations used to say. Like even in Buddhism, they say that all this that we experiencing in the samsara, in birth and death and rebirth, in this realm, it's an illusion,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And if now, like I said before, with the perception, we know that our brains construct reality. Right? It's not like we're seeing reality as it is.
Mhm.
So that kind of confirms what the Buddhists say, that it's just a illusion, right? So if space and time are not fundamental, something arises out of something else, which might be consciousness itself, like one universal consciousness. I'm saying universal because we can have these experiences where we can actually experience that, where we experience our egos dissolve, and suddenly I'm you, you are me, I'm everything, everything is me. So why do we have these experiences? Like if you just say it's a hallucination, I don't buy into it. It's a cheap explanation, you know. So again, if if all reality exists within consciousness, then it is possible that there are also different realities. There are that this reality, it seems very firm, and we are so used to being in this reality, that we think like this must be it. You know,
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot, especially after those lucid dreams, that we spend what 66% roughly, speaking of our lifetime, in this state of consciousness like we are right now,
Mhm.
when we are experiencing this material world. Obviously I can't really punch through this piece of concrete with my hand or something like that. It seems
Solid.
solid. Yeah.
Mhm.
So we so used to it. And when you think of the other 33%, well, most of it we are unconscious, the non-REM sleep. Then we have dreams, which we like to just say, oh, it's just our brain doing things. It's not important. Then we have other states of consciousness, which are fairly rare compared to the time we spend in this state of consciousness, to the point where our Western civilization um, thinks, generally speaking, that there's no value in these kinds of states of consciousness. Only this state of consciousness where we are productive, making money, and paying rent. That's the only one that matters, right? And again, uh, the other states of consciousness which played a big role in the lives of our ancestors and which brought us together a lot more than which is something we need now. Um, we can't just say that there's no value in them,
Mm-hmm.
right? And back to my point, we spend so much time and so in this state of consciousness and so little in these other states of consciousness that we think that this is it. And then we get attached to things and we think that this has to be it. Right? But it might be that, well, it's definitely temporary, all this. We all gonna die at some point, and we gonna have to face whatever comes afterwards. So, a lot of people tend to shy away from these things, but one of the reasons why I still go into this and try to think about it, research it, like talk to people like you, is because inevitably we gonna have to face it at some point. So why not try to figure things out before that?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, ignoring it doesn't make it
go
pretending
away.
it's not there doesn't mean that it ever goes away, like, we're all going there. And yeah, I'm like you, I'm like, I'm not scared of being uncomfortable, and I think that's that thing is we, like, wanna stay and our brains want this, our bodies, we want homeostasis, we wanna stay in the comfort zone, we wanna stay
Yeah,
comfortable, and it's like some of these concepts and these things, they stretch the mind and they go beyond the comfort zone. And if we can train ourselves and condition ourselves to not make it wrong when we feel uncomfortable. Like, it's okay to experience pain. It's okay to experience discomfort. It's okay to hear someone's perspective that's not the same as yours, that challenges maybe some of the beliefs, that you have. And it's like, why do we asking ourselves why we shy away from that, or why we push away from that, or why we don't want to feel fear, instead of just leaning all the way in and welcoming in those questions and welcoming in the fear and welcoming in the unknown and welcoming the discomfort of not knowing. I think that's a level of maturity that not a lot of people ever reach, right? So I love that you're asking the questions and that we can have conversations like this and um, be okay with not knowing and being okay with questioning and being uncomfortable and looking at stuff that's kind of scary.
yeah. In case of my life, asking these questions and getting interested and trying to figure things out, it did put me on a better life path,
Mhm,
that I would normally be on. So I'm quite grateful for that. And somehow I had it in me since I was a kid,
mhm,
like always drawn to this kind of stuff. Like you were saying about certain vibes, as on the previous podcast I did yesterday with Jeff Seo, I was saying that there were certain things in my life where when I encountered them, I was like, this is it,
mhm,
right? Like there was a certain vibe to it, or I don't know how to explain it, but I knew that I want to pursue it and I want to learn about it. I want to do this thing. And now with hindsight, I look back and all these things play a huge role in my life,
mhm,
more than all the rest of it.
mhm,
So it's quite interesting.
mhm. Like your soul was guiding you along the like
Sort of,
right path.
yeah. I had even this idea maybe it's the influence of the future coming back, because even Jacques Vallée had those who are into UFOs and that kind of stuff probably know him. Um, Research he's been on. He's in his 80s, but he's so freaking sharp. Very interesting person. He's one of the people why we have the internet. So
Mm,
he's not just some kind of random dude. Very intelligent person. So he had this interesting TED talk where he was also talking about actual causality and how time can possibly flow both ways.
mhm,
That it's not just at the end we don't even know what causality is. There's no proper definition to say like what it actually is a transfer of energy, or we don't know. When it comes to time, we always spoke about it a little bit, but within physics, there's only one thing that kind of points, you know, um, explains the flow of time from past to present to future, and there is entropy. But even the guy who came up with this he said that it's probably just statistics entropy, right? It's let's say you got two rooms, one is filled with hydrogen, one with helium. You open a door between them, and they start mixing together, and there's the entropy. Everything goes from from an ordered state to a more disordered state over time, right? And scientists say that that's the error of time, right? Going from past to future, from an ordered state to a more disordered state. Now, the problem is that there's so many more states where the atoms within those two rooms are just messed up, not separated like they were at the beginning. It's literally just statistics that it's going to go from an ordered state to a more disordered state. So saying that this explains the flow of time, the arrow of time going from past to future, might be a bit of a stretch, right? Which means then there's nothing really saying that there's a certain flow of time and the causality going from cause to the cause being the past and result in the future or present, right? Now there are some experiments, for example, like you probably heard about the double slit experiment in quantum mechanics. Yeah, there's an interesting variation of this experiment where they split the particles so they go both ways or waves, and can't remember exactly how it goes, but the result is that the future observation of the wave or particle makes the wavelength, the wave collapse into a particle in a past or present. So the future observation causes it to collapse, which is now, how does that happen? Is it because the cause is in the future and it affects the past and present? That might also indicate in a way that the time or the influence can go both ways, not just from the past to the present and future, but it can also go the other way and from the future to the present and past. Something that definitely needs more research, but me being back to what I was saying earlier about these things which end up playing a big role in my life, and was kind of drawn to them. What if the future me, which does these things a lot, whether it's training, playing music, writing music, and researching these things, what if that was my future self influencing the present and past me? We don't know. It's a possibility.
I do this with clients too, where we do timeline jumping. So I've done where I've gone back to past versions of me, right? Like there was a version, you can do this in hypnosis too. There's different types of hypnosis to do like regression to back to childhood memories in your subconscious mind. But I've just done this consciously in meditation when I would ask my higher self to show me which aspect of me needed love at that moment or needed support. And I've gone back to memories of like me in my dorm room studying for anatomy and just crying my eyes out. And like me as I am now, I go up to her and I'm like, oh my God, I love you so much. And we do this little kind of like healing and I encourage her. And honestly, I've had moments where I've looked back at different situations that were really hard. And I think I like prayed or asked for help. And I remember feeling supported. And then I have this sense that it was me from the future being like, it's going to be okay, and me providing that support. And I've also done it the opposite way where, and I do this with clients a lot, if they're trying to move beyond a certain limitation or manifest something, you can connect with a future version of yourself and you ask like, what do they feel like? How are they presenting? Like, what do they wear? What do they eat? What are their habits? What are their thoughts? how do they relate to their body? How do they relate to their career? How do they relate to money? How do they relate to other people? Are they in relationship? Like, and you connect with a future version of you, which is a potential, right? And then you start to embody those qualities and give yourself permission to start being them now. And that actually like collapses the timelines of becoming that person, whether that might have taken you 8 or 9 years to become that person. Becoming them and being them now shortens that timeline, which is really another fascinating kind of like concept. Basically what you were describing is like future versions, connecting to them, and even being the version now and connecting to past versions of you and helping them. So it's crazy. I love it.
Yeah. Even one thing that comes to my mind as well is this simulation theory. Right? That's a bit of a paradox there, because scientists are so adamant that spirits and angels and the kind of stuff cannot exist, but yet they are still willing to accept this idea that all this can be just computer code. They can all reality exists within some kind of supercomputer somewhere. Which, if that is the case, which I personally don't subscribe to this idea entirely, if it is the case, then everything is possible in this world, including spirits and angels and aliens, whatever. So that's a bit paradoxical.
Yeah, that's so true. I haven't thought about that. That's one of those things, again, that the mind is like, I don't like it.
Yeah. But like in a way, it might be some sort of simulation, but then again, it's like a very anthropocentric way of saying it. Like all this is within, all this is computer code because we have computers. And if you think about it, if there is something out there which can generate an entire universe and reality like this, and consciousness and everything, it's going to be nothing like the computers we have. You can't really call it a computer.
Yeah.
So in a way, you could call it a simulation, like you were saying earlier, that it's an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's nothing like our computer codes in computers.
Mm-hmm.
So back to your gifts. Is it something that runs in your family?
It's actually not. I mean, I think it does. My family has not developed their gifts. My grandparents on both sides, I think some of my grandparents were sensitive to energy and didn't have the awareness or the resources to be able to understand and accept and embrace and then develop those gifts. I never lived by my grandparents and had grandparents die before I was born. And so I never really was very close to my family, as far as like my extended family, like grandparents, like a lot of people get to be. So I don't know a ton about them. And then my mom and my dad, they are both very spiritual and my mom especially is very sensitive to energy. But again, I think they had too much fear and they were too in religion and in their religious community that they weren't willing to risk that, or didn't maybe even necessarily have the desire to really develop those gifts. So, I mean, I definitely think that the gifts are in my lineage. I just don't think that they were like, there's no one in my family that's, been a psychic or an energy healer or like, a shaman or anything like that. And so for me to step into that was a very big shock and disruption to my immediate family. that now I've worked through, and we kind of agree to disagree on things, and we love and support who we are, even if we don't agree, or align with the things that we choose to do, or like, in the world. But no, it's not something that I'm even aware of. And I've done like ancestral work, and I've just not really, like, any ancestors within the last like 3 generations have not been um, very spiritual, to be honest, which is strange because I know we talked about that running in family lines. So not for me personally.
Mm-hmm. No, I must say that there is something on in my family.
Mm.
You know, like a few years before I left Slovakia to go to UK, like the last 2 3 years, so there was stuff coming up that just my parents never talked about it before. You know, I'm glad they did because I never saw them afterwards until they passed away 2 years ago. And even my grandma mentioned certain things like her mom when she was a kid. And it's funny you mentioned these angelic beings, and they got kind of like feminine and light and all that. Well, I'll just share another story. So my grandma, she came from the southern border of Slovakia with Hungary. So it was like 5 kilometers from the border. And her mom, when she was a kid, if I remember the story right, she would go with some of these workers that would just cut down trees in the forest or something like that. So they would get on the truck and she would go with them. At one point, she was out there and there was a big hole in the ground at some point, somewhere near where she lived, near the forest. And she would just go to the edge of it, right, and to a precipice, and this being would come out of the bottom of it. It was also like a light being,
Mhm.
kind of feminine, because they were also all Christians over there. She would say it was like Holy Mary or
Mhm.
something like that. So and this being just came out of it, and she just like did a gesture to tell my great grandma to stay away from the hole, so it
Mm.
doesn't fall down or something. So she then went away. She came back home and she told her, was it? Yeah, I think it was her mom. So my great great grandma, and she told her about it, and my her mom's response was like, "Don't talk about it. We don't talk about this kind of stuff." Because like when you mention your parents, I mean a lot of the stuff, most of the stuff that we're talking about on this podcast, it will be deemed demonic or satanic in the eyes of hardcore Christians, which yeah, it's definitely not a good idea to suppress all this stuff.
Mhm.
And now we are talking about these things running in families, because there's a lot of folklore to do with this stuff. That these gifts they run in families, so there might be some kind of genetic component. And just before this podcast, I did some research on it because I've heard about it before about this research. So it's for our listeners, you can check out Dr. Dean Radin, Radin, who did a very interesting research where well, he wanted to see whether people like you or definitely people who have certain gifts, have paranormal experiences, whether there's something in their genes that causes this, right? So he found out of 3,000 people, 13 people where he could somehow determine that yes, these people have certain gifts, and he was able to prove it somehow, or that they run in their family as well. Right. So he had these 13 people. Now the interesting thing is that when you're doing a proper study in the control group, so he had to find 13 people who never had an experience and who never spoken to a person who had any of these
Mm.
experiences, whether it was friends or family, none of that, right? And that was even harder than to find those 13 people who had these experiences.
Uh-huh.
That's already the
That's how
first
common it
interesting
is.
things.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And turns out that yes, he did find a genetic mutation there, but that's the second surprise. It wasn't in the people who had these experiences. It was in the people who didn't have those experiences. And apparently, it's more common in the countries of the which used to be the Holy Roman Empire in the past. So on that area where there's more people who have this genetic mutation, which causes them not to have these experiences.
Mm.
And now, question on you: what happened in the Dark Ages?
I don't know. Isn't that why they're called the Dark Ages? I mean, are you talking about the Crusades and stuff?
Close.
I don't know.
Inquisition.
Oh.
Witch hunts.
Yeah.
They were literally targeting people who had some kind of interesting experiences, like
Yeah.
people like you would burn on a stake,
Oh,
right?
I'd be killed real quick. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So there was a bit of like a evolutionary selection going on there,
Yeah.
which you know, which caused this anomaly there, where people in the West, which are mostly descendants of people in Europe of those ages,
Mm-hmm.
they have more of them have this genetic mutation, which causes them not to have certain experiences. Because this scientist says it seems like we all have these predispositions. So they're stronger, some less. But it seems like it's common to all people. But yeah, in some cases it can be a bit harder to get these experiences.
And that makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. Like, if your life is threatened on a genetic level, you're going to adapt to that, right? So that's so smart of the the body or the consciousness to kind of turn that off if it was life threatening, you know? That's so
And
fascinating.
even from an evolutionary standpoint of view, like if you have good intuition and if you have some extrasensory abilities, it's only going to help you survive in nature, right?
Mhm.
So those people who survived better would pass on the genes on next generations.
Mhm.
So you'll have more people. It will make sense for pretty much all of us to have these abilities.
Yeah.
And then because of the Inquisition, yeah, they kind of messed up things for us in the West. Perhaps that's one of the reasons why we are so materialistic over here. So
Yeah.
focus on just this realm.
Mhm. Mhm. So interesting. And yeah, I mean, when we do focus on, if we do believe that this is all there is and that this is what's really important, right? Like, we are much more easily controlled and manipulated and serve a system of um, physicality, right? Because if we believed that we had access to create things that we wanted or had access to other realms or that there was more than this, we wouldn't be as concerned or bought in or efficient, maybe, right, to work and make money and produce and succeed. And and maybe we would, it'd be just be from a different level of consciousness. But I think it's just interesting to think how the ideas of like that physicality and coming from just that physical space influences the way that we show up and the choices that we make.
Yeah, I think people, if they would see that there's more to life, I think they would be in general happier than they are right now.
Hmm.
Because at the end, like I said in the previous podcast, I really think that pretty much everything that we do in life is so we can feel connected and loved and experience beauty. That's all what it comes down to. But these days, because like if your entire life is just to work in a job that you don't like, just to earn money and do this, watch Netflix or stuff like that, you can't feel satisfied with that kind of life.
Hmm.
You can't. And even if someone says that all this stuff that we're talking about is absolute nonsense, that it's woo, but at the end of the day, it does make our lives better.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure. It does bring us together.
Yeah.
And these kinds of experiences, they show us that there is more to life and that we are more connected than we think we are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree.
So I want to ask you, if there was one experience of all the ones that you had in your life, if there was one experience that you could tell someone to convince them that that it is true. Do you have one like that? It's like very convincing.
Hmm. I think I have a very wonderful, the one that comes to mind is I have a energy healing friend who I met at an energy healing training in um, Arizona. And she is the most advanced, probably energy healer that I've met in person. And we did this, it was a training, and we did all sorts of energy healing training. But one of the activities that we did was the instructor gave us all a picture, like an image of someone's face, a real person. And the instructor had done a remote energy healing on this person. And so he had done this like 3 years before the class. So he had all the notes from his actual session and what the guy was struggling with and why he came for a session, and then what the actual session entailed. Okay. So our job was to look at this photo, and this is an energy healing technique. When I do distance energy healing, you look into someone's eyes and you read their energy through their eyes. And so we all just had this photo, and we all had the same photo. And the task of the project was to look into this person's eyes and then do an energy healing on them, or receive, like, what information are you receiving? What does this person need help with? So he told us nothing about this person except it was his past client from 3 years ago. And then he had people raise their hands and say what they were receiving. And all of us were kind of struggling. Like, I definitely got, this was early on in my journey of energy healing and training too. So I got specific words and saw a couple different things. But this person who was very advanced and has been doing this for 20 plus years, she literally word for word, like, said every physical ailment, every issue that this person was having. And it was like a complete match to the healing that he had done and the information he had received 3 years prior. So she picked up on, like, physical issues of like a thyroid issue, an issue he was having with his father. There was something around, she saw like a yellow taxi cab. And in this guy's healing, he had someone in his family had been hit by a yellow taxi cab and killed. And so it was like, just literally, like, the stuff that she was sharing was everything that this client 3 years ago came to this other person for. And it was just like this moment where I was like, how is this possible? Like, again, so crazy. And so I've had so many different things like that. Also on that retreat, there was a younger guy who came in who was only like 20, and he had super bad scoliosis. And the instructor led another student through reorganizing his spine. And literally, like, there's a before and after picture, and I was in the room, like, right in front of him, and I watched his spine realign, like, physically. So again, that's not something that, like, obviously another person can take my word or not, right? But like, from a personal experience, to like see someone's spine physically realign in front of your own eyes, that's like a person that you've been hanging out with for 3 days, that is like a normal person. And it was just like, those experiences are what show me, like, that all of this is connected and that this is real.
Mhm.
So those are my two stories. That retreat was like, and that training was like one of my favorite experiences for all of this kind of stuff, because it felt like those things just happened over and over again to myself and to the other people I was around. And that's really the trip that I think, and the training that opened my eyes to like, oh my gosh, the potential, of this work and how amazing it is. So yeah, that's what
Yeah.
came to my mind. I don't know that that would like prove anything to anyone, but it definitely proved it to me.
Yeah. Now, the first part of your story is basically you were describing influencing something in a different place and perhaps even time, right? On a distance, like healing someone at
Mhm.
a distance. Now, this kind of ties in what the scientist that I was talking about just a few minutes ago, Dr. Dean Radin. He did also some research on influencing things at a distance or in, non-locally, basically. So he did, for example, he got some Buddhist monks to bless some tea, which that was like a double-blind study where they gave the blessed tea to certain people and the control group just got normal tea, right? The same tea, obviously.
Mhm.
And those people who got the blessed tea, they reported to have a better mood. Now, measuring or quantifying mood is a bit tricky, right?
Mhm.
It's a bit subjective. So then he took a certain plant, which he mentioned this certain gene that has, which can apparently have certain quantum qualities to it. So that certain gene could have been targeted, a good target for some non-local influences, possibly. That was the idea. So he had a few plants. Some of them received blessed water, some of them didn't. And turns out that the plants which got the blessed water, they grew a little bit more, just a few millimeters, but it was very consistent.
Mhm.
So it was statistically significant data there, right? To confirm this, that something, this water, which only got really mentally blessed by these people, something changed within that water and had a physical influence. Then he did a similar thing also with stem cells, because when you have stem cells in vitro, they obviously those are the cells which can turn into any other cell within the body. If you inject it into the heart, they become heart tissue, for example. There's a lot of research going on that, and very promising one. So, but these cells, they can only this ability to shapeshift and turn into other cells, the stemness. It only lasts a certain time, right? So again, he got people to focus on these cells, and those cells which got this mental focus on, they retain their stemness for a longer time.
Mhm.
That's pretty interesting. And there's also the thing with random number generators. Have you heard about that?
Yes, that is fascinating too. I can't remember where that research was done, but I remember like hearing about that briefly and being like, that is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, again, ties into what we were saying. For my listeners, I want to give them something more than just anecdotal stuff, but because there is some actual research going on, and there's some good studies out there, which, again, most scientists say they don't exist, but they are out there. There's
Mhm.
some significant data out there. So these random number generators, it's a small device which basically works on decaying radioactive material. It's obviously not much. It's going to die from radiation or something like that. But it decays, and there's a probability of it going yes or no, or 1 or 0, 50-50. Right. So 50 times it'll give you yes answer, 50% time 0 or no. All right. And it should be like that all the time. But turns out when you focus on it, that you want it to give more yes answers, or yeah, it'll do that, right?
Mhm.
So on an individual level, then there was a big research which is actually global. You had people all over the planet having these devices, and there was an interesting instance because this was going on. I'm not sure which years, but it was definitely going on in 2001 September. right? 9/11, when that happened. So this issue was going on at that time, and they were collecting all the data from all over the planet. And suddenly, they realized there were actually two spikes on the time as the planes hit the World Trade Center. Now, there was one spike when it actually happened, but there was also one spike in data which preceded it, just before it happened. Now, why is that? That's a good question.
Mm-hmm. So fascinating, though. I love stuff like that. I feel like Dr. Joe Dispenza has a lot of, like, mentions a lot of different studies in his work as well, which is really interesting. So yeah, it's out there. People are doing it. People are doing research, and I feel like it's becoming more common, actually. I really do.
It's getting better.
Yeah, so that's good, because the more people that are interested in it and the more that energy it gains momentum, and then more higher level research will come out about it. So cool.
At the end of the day, we need to be open-minded to be able to look at the world that we have, and because at the end of the day, what we are all doing, even right now, is just trying to figure out a theory, a model, which explains what we are seeing, right? That's all there is. Like the theory of relativity, quantum mechanics, those are all theories which are there to explain to us what we see. Now, they're not perfect. For example, like these two main theories that we have, the theory of relativity explains what we see on a bigger scale, like planets, stars, galaxies, black holes, on all that stuff. Big, massive objects, large scale. Quantum mechanics works on the subatomic scale, things we don't see, and they get super crazy over there. It's also another sign which shows that reality is not exactly what we think it is, because on a quantum level, it's so counterintuitive. Things can be at two places at one time. Things pop in and out of existence in there, and it's crazy. Then you get quantum entanglement, where information can somehow travel through vast distances of space in zero time.
Yeah.
Which also might be an indication that whatever underlies space and time, there's something there, something that's beyond space and time, where for which the information can travel like that in an instance, zero time, which should not be possible according to theory of relativity. And both of these uh, still can't explain certain things about the universe, like black holes. It's a supermassive object, but it's also super tiny, the singularity. And we don't really have a quantum model of gravity. So we have certain things we observe, but we can't really explain them. So that means we need a better model of what's going on, better theory, right? And some people even say that the reason why we can't reconcile relativity and quantum mechanics is because we are leaving out consciousness. Some people say that that's the missing link, which could combine both of them and give us a good picture of what reality is. So again, we cannot dismiss your experiences, my experiences, and the experience of millions of people, and say that's all just nonsense just because it doesn't fit our previous model of reality. We should be open-minded enough to be able to look at this and, well, maybe there's something in our previous model which we need to change and, revisit. So one last thing that I want to ask you, and then we finish, because it's more than 2 hours that we've been going on. Yeah,
good luck. You're gonna have to edit a lot.
It's fine. Definitely gonna have to do a second part, because I could go on for hours.
Right? It's so fun. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. So back to the process of dying. What kind of advice would you give to people when it comes to supporting people who are in the process of dying?
I would say, like, if you have a family member or a friend or someone close to you that, is terminally ill or is is passing away, I would say to be super present with them, even though that's going to make you uncomfortable. Because I would find that when patients would have visitors, a lot of times the visitors would not know what to say, or they wouldn't know how to react, because as humans, a lot of times we're like, oh, it's okay because, and we want to make people feel better. And in the instance of death, there's like nothing you can say to be like, oh, well, it's okay because, blah, blah, blah. Or like, you might get better. It's like, no. So people get so uncomfortable around people who are dying because they don't know how to interact. They don't know what to say. They want to try and make it better. It makes them face their own mortality. So being around that person makes them turn inward and makes them uncomfortable. So I would say that, and this is my experience and my approach in hospice, was I just really treated that person like exactly like you and I are treating each other now. Like treating them like they're normal, like nothing's like they're not weird or crazy or scary now because they're dying, right? Like, and not needing to say things. We mentioned earlier that language is so limited. And what we all really want is to feel connected and to feel loved and to feel seen and to feel a part of someone and something, right? And we don't have to use words to do that. And so sometimes with my patients, I would just go and sit with them, or I would just, hold their hand, or I would just be present. Like I would bring all of my consciousness. I would let go of time. And for that moment or those moments, I would just be fully there with them. And I didn't need to say anything to make them feel any better. And I didn't need to say anything for me to feel like something needed to be said. Like, can you be comfortable just sitting with a person, being with them, and realizing how valuable that time is because theirs is so limited? So what an honor and a privilege to be able to just be in someone's aura, in their space, in their presence, when they don't have a lot of that linear time left. So I would say that if someone has a family member, a close person to them, sitting with them, being present with them, not needing to say anything if they don't want to talk, and then also holding really open space for them if they do want to talk. Because some patients really want to share and they really want to talk and they really want to go over memories, and then others don't want to speak at all. And so honoring whatever that person needs and then realizing where you're being triggered, what's being triggered within you that has nothing to do with that person, right? Like, why are you getting uncomfortable? Why are you feeling like you need to say something, So allowing it as an opportunity for you to grow, and just remembering what an honor and a privilege it is to be with someone in their last moments, whether that's months or weeks or days or hours. So that's what I would say. That'd be my advice, to just be with them, be present, and look within as to if you're uncomfortable, why.
Great. I think that's great advice. So let's finish this off. Every person that comes on my podcast gets 3 questions at the end, which my listeners, you can find them all in separate playlists. So I thought this would be a good idea to ask every person the same questions and to see all the answers and have them in one place where you can find them. So first question: if there was one short advice you could give to people, what would it be?
I would say my most powerful advice and what's coming to me now is to be yourself fully, and to really allow yourself to evolve and change and grow, allowing yourself to change your mind, and allowing yourself to just do the things that make you feel good. Do the, you know, own the things that you love and that make you feel good and make you feel aligned, because every person is different, and every person has fun differently, and every person enjoys different things. So just allowing yourself to be yourself fully and follow the evolution of who you become, right? Because we're ever changing. So be yourself.
Yeah. Great. Second question. What does femininity mean to you?
Femininity to me means receptivity. It means allowing. It means receiving. It means trusting. It means opening up your essence. It means power and magnetism and inner strength that doesn't require force, but that just is its essence, right? I feel like the feminine energy draws everything to herself that she wants and desires, and does it in such a powerful and effortless way.
Great. And last question. What do you think is the meaning of life?
I think the meaning of life is just to have experiences. Like, I really believe the essence of why we're all here is to experience life in all of its fullness. And I think, again, we come back to this place of the mind, and the mind says, this is a good experience and this is a bad experience. This is a right decision and this is a wrong decision. And I think that the meaning of life is so much bigger, in the sense of we're just here to have experiences. And some of those are going to be more pleasant and pleasurable, and some of those are going to be very painful, right? But that it's all valuable, and that it all sends data back to that oneness consciousness, right? Like, everything we experience as individuals, that data almost goes to the collective, right? And so I think the meaning of life is to just have experiences and to be fully alive.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for doing this, for being on my podcast. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Good. We had a great time. This was such a fun quantum conversation.
Yeah, definitely. So, and where can people find you?
You can find me on my website, AllisonFinley.com. It has all my kind of offers, coaching, readings. If you want to learn energy work, if you want to work through some limitations, all that kind of stuff is on there. And then I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at Allison Hope Finley. And I actually also have a podcast. It's really just where I share energy tools, and I share kind of personal development concepts and talk some quantum things. I just kind of get on and riff and talk about whatever spirit inspires me to do. And that's the Energetic Sovereignty podcast on Apple and Spotify. So those are all the places you can find me.
Awesome. As always, you'll be able to find all the links in the description below, whether it's to Allison or to myself. And yeah, again, thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for having me. We'll definitely have to do a part 2 if it flows.
So. Oh yeah, definitely. Lots to talk about. We haven't even spoken about aliens and Bigfoot and all this stuff.
I know. There's so much more quantum shit to talk about.
Yeah, definitely.